Hello guys, um, welcome back to the pre-recording videos. Uh, it looks like with the COVID-19 we're not gonna have physical labs anymore, and until the end of the semester we're probably gonna continue to have online pre-recorded lectures, not online sessions. I will try to incorporate some new things in my pre-recorded lectures because I can because the whole point of a lab is to have a physical labs, and today we're supposed to have look at the microscopes, but we're not going to be able to do this. But I find the way to help us to reach that goal. So today we're going to talk about the animal organization. So we finished talking about the cells and macromolecules. So first portion of our class was concentrate and focus to explain the chemical level of cells, different molecules, DNA, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. And then we talk about the structure of a single cells, plant cells, and animal cells or prokaryotic cells. We talk how they function, the organelles, function of organelles. So please remember on the midterm, which is going to be April 7, I'm going to ask about those questions. I'm going to ask about the experiments. Please come back to the chapter and review information you need to know for the midterm. And please check my quizzes, which is I uploaded on Blackboard. Study those questions. If you have any questions, please email me. Alright, new part of our class, we're gonna talk about in the bigger scale of how the animals, the structure of animals, the structure of our body. We're gonna talk in a scale of the tissue, scale of organs, and system organs. In this example, this is a tissue. The tissue, it's a group of cells which have similar function and similar structure, and this tissue has a unique function. In this case, it's the smooth muscles. Their function is to contract. We can find them in an organ. So different types of muscles are gonna make up an organ. In this case, this is a stomach. Stomach has smooth muscles, epithelial tissue, nerve tissues, and connective tissue. And an organ and different organs gonna make up a system. In this case, it's gonna be digestive system, which is include different organs, which is have the main function is to provide food for our body. So I'm gonna introduce you for 4 different types of tissue we have. The 4 major types are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, and muscle tissue. The biggest difference between in today's lectures, I'm gonna only cover epithelial tissue and connective tissue. So the biggest difference between epithelial tissue and, for example, connective tissue, which is gonna talk about, is the density of cells in this tissue. The density of cells in the connective tissue much less than density of cells in epithelial tissue. We're gonna see this in the great examples. So epithelial tissue, basic function of epithelial tissue is to cover body surfaces in lines body cavities. So if you have any surface in our body, it's going to be covered with the epithelial tissue. And connective tissue, it's a tissue which is going to connect different parts of a body to each other. For example, 2 different bones going to connect to each other by connective tissue, or muscle is going to connect to the adjacent bone by a connective tissue, or nerves and nervous tissue is also going to be connected to the muscle. So somewhere else and be supported by connective tissue. So it not only binds, but also it supports body parts. The easiest example of epithelial tissue is our skin. Skin represents the biggest organ in our body, and it has different types of epithelial tissue, and we're going to talk about this. Before to talk about the epithelial tissue, let me explain different vocabulary and explain what they mean. So first of all is a squamous. Squamous basically means it's a flattened, something really flat. Then cuboidal, when all the sides of a cubes are the same, it means the shape is cubical. When you have a columnar shape, it means the size, it means something is really tall, right? In this case, those columns probably in Assyria or Egypt. Then we have we have three different shapes of a simple, or three shapes of epithelial cells, and those shapes is going to determine what kind of epithelial tissue we have. We have two types of epithelial tissue. We have three types of shapes and two types of tissue. So one type is a simple. It has only one layer of cells, one of the cells. It could be simple squamous, simple cuboidal, and simple columnar. Then we have stratified. It means you have more than one layer of cells, and they place top on top of each other. For example, like those cubes, right? So in this case, it's going to be stratified cuboidal epithelial tissue. Also, we have a pseudostratified, which is just appeared to be a layered tissue, but instead of to be layered, it's a single layer of cells. This is just a cartoon representation of cells. The biggest difference, the way you can identify which one cell it is by the shape of a cells, first of all, and the shape of a nuclei. In the squamous cells, the shape of nuclei is flattened, and the cell space by itself is very flat. In a cuboidal cells, the nuclei is round, and all the sizes and the size of a cells, the side of cells are pretty much equal, so they looks like a cube. In the columnar cells, the nuclei is more like ellipse form, and it's also mimic the shape of a cell, which is in our case is a columnar cell. Each cell have an apical surface and a basal surface. Basal surface is attached to the basal membrane. Every epithelial tissue has a basal membrane, which is represent a connective tissue. So epithelial cells have to be bind to something. It could be two things: either cells by itself, some other different cells, epithelial cells, or connective tissue. In our case, this is a basal membrane. Basal membrane. The basal membrane is made from collagen fibers, protein glycans, glycoproteins, elastin, and different types of fibers, which is make a surface where the cells can attach and be supported. So I'm gonna talk about those cells right now, and explain, and I'm gonna show the real samples as we will be used in class, to see the actual samples, see how the cells looks under microscopes, and how to be able to see the difference between different types of cells. So the first of all, the first the first how you can determine which type of a cells is by shape, obviously, because they different by shape, and we're gonna talk about why they have why epithelial cells have a different shape. So first of all you can see, this is a basal membrane, all attached to the basal membrane. This is simple squamous epithelium, simple cuboidal epithelium, simple columnar epithelium, and pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. As you can see, all of them have different nuclei, right? The nuclei of a squamous epithelium is flattened, and nuclei of a cuboidal epithelium is more round. And nuclei of a columnar cells have especially these ones, is a little bit longer. So you kind of represent the shape of this cell. Then we have stratified epithelial tissue. What does it mean to be stratified? It means you have more just one layer of cells. As we can see, all of them attach to one layer, right? So you have only single cells to be attached to the basal membrane in every case. In a stratified squamous epithelium, you have also a basal membrane, but you have many cells to be attached, and that's why it calls to be, and that's why it called stratified squamous epithelium. Also, they flatten on the surface. They represent the shape of flattened shapes. So I'm gonna upload those PowerPoints. Please come back to this site. I'm not gonna talk about this. I'm not just gonna read from the slide, but what you have to do, you have to go to this PowerPoints and see the difference where where the simple squamous is located, its function, and so on. I'm gonna talk about the function when I'm gonna talk about the real samples, and the main purpose of this slide is you to just have an idea what we have, different types of epithelial cells, and you approximately should know where it's located. Approximately, you shouldn't know, like, first of all, for example, stratified squamous epithelium, this is a skin. Okay, now let's go to the real samples. So let me introduce this website. So this website is, the name of this website is Histology Guide. This is one of the best histology website which you can use, called Virtual Histology Laboratory. This is the best choice and the solution for us. The way to navigate, you have a slide box. You go to the slide box and you can choose the different types of a tissue, nervous tissue, skin, anything you want, and then you can, in greater details, analyze the structure on those cells or tissue. I'm gonna introduce right now to the simple from the right, in the right portion, you can see the description of a sample and some description of a name and links. So if you're gonna click on a blue simple squamous epithelium, it's gonna locate you to this region. In this case, it's a kidney. Right here we can see simple squamous epithelium. And the way I can recognize and see this is simple squamous epithelium is by shape of a nuclei. We can see this shape is flattened. For example, if you're gonna compare to this cell, which is actually cuboidal cells, those cells have a round nuclei, and they look like their side pretty much equal. So this is a cuboidal cells. This is a good example right here on the left. But those ones have very flattened nuclei, and their function, the function of a squamous simple epithelium is diffusion and osmosis. So what they do, this is a kidney, and the major function of a kidney is to filtrate our blood. And when filtration happens, it happens by diffusion and osmosis. It's a lot of diffusion and osmosis happens with the nutrition. That's a great example is going to be our lungs, where diffusion of a gases happens, right? Oxygen goes and diffuse and goes from the high concentration to low concentration to a bloodstream. We can see a good example of capillaries. Capillaries also have the capillaries are the smallest blood vessels in our body, and they made from simple squamous epithelium. So red blood cells can give up the oxygen to the tissue around itself. And to be able to do this, those cells have to be really flat to be able to let the gases and nutrients to go freely back and forth. So that's why that's why I said the shape is represent the function of the cell. And you can see a really good basal membrane right here, which just goes right here, or you can see the basal membrane, which is a little bit tiny right there, and cells attach to that basal membrane. Every cell have to be attached to somewhere. In a simple epithelial, when you have only one layer of cells, every single cells have to be attached to the basal membrane. And as you can see, they packed really tightly. You don't have a space between two cells. You don't. Each cells is gonna interact with adjacent cells. It's always gonna bind to the basal membrane, and a neighbor cells is gonna attach to the neighbor cells by junctions. We have different types of junctions, but basically it's gonna prevent. So in the case of a kidney, those tight junction is gonna prevent the loss of water through those cells, right? In a simple squamous epithelium, we don't have this tight junctions, so different molecules can go through very freely. So please be able to identify be able to tell the difference between cuboidal epithelial and, for example, simple squamous epithelium, or right here, simple squamous. The shape of a nuclei represent the shape of a cell. The next example is going to be a thick skin. This thick skin you can find on a palmar, hands and feet, surfaces of feet, and we have stratified squamous keratinized epithelium, or stratified squamous epithelium. So what does that mean? It means you have many layers of cells, right? You don't have just a one cell, you have many, I don't know how many cells here, 20, 30. The biggest difference in skin, the first portion of those cells are dead. Those are keratinized cells which is act and they accumulate keratin. Keratin is a protein, hydrophobic protein, which is going to repel water. It's going to protect our skin. And those cells, which is darkly stained cells, are melanocytes, which is going to accumulate melanin. And melanin is going to protect our skin from the UV light, and it's also going to give a color to our skin. So the more melanin you have, the darker your skin. And as you can see, so the first layer of this epithelial stratified squamous epithelium are stem cells. So what is the stem cells? Stem cells are cells which can become any type of cells. In our case, it can become any type of epithelial, and they can divide indefinitely many times, right? So usually a cells can divide by 30-45 times and then it's gonna die. Stem cells gonna divide they're gonna divide indefinitely, so they do not have a limit. Those cells gonna make these are progeny cells. They're gonna make new cells to give new cells for epithelium. So every year we're gonna lose all the time. You touch your skin. The layer of the skin is breaking down, right? And you lose some skin, and the new skin is gonna the new cells is gonna grow. They first they look like a cuboidal cells, and when they go to the top, they become more flattened. They accumulate more melanin, they accumulate more keratin, and they're gonna die. So this layer is dead cells, and this layer is live cells, because you can see nuclei. And some of the nuclei get flattened. It means the cells get flattened. The function of a skin is to protect from the physical barrier. It's a physical barrier of water, physical barrier of a temperature, of chemicals, from harsh environment. It protects our body. It keeps keeps all the surfaces protected. The last example we're gonna talk is a simple columnar cells. Simple where you can find simple columnar cells. You can find them in our stomach, in our digestive tract. Those columnar cells have if you're gonna compare the nuclei of the columnar cells, they represent kind of the shape of those cells. And as I said before, those cells have a lot of function. I say the shape of a cell determines the function of a cell, and the bigger the size of a cell, it means the more function it has. And as you can think, columnar cells the main function of a columnar cells in the digestive tract is to absorb nutrition. So when you eat food, your digestive tract and juices is gonna break it down, and protease is gonna break down proteins, sugars to macromolecules, and those macromolecules has to be absorbed by those cells, and this is a lot of work for cells. So that's what, and when they absorb those cells, those macromolecules has to be processed, and so this is a blood vessels right here. So this is a villi. This is a villi in a small intestines. Finger-like projections called villi to increase absorption area. So when those cells gonna absorb nutritions, right, and they're gonna process them, they're gonna distribute those nutritions to the bloodstream, and in the bloodstream, and when they absorb to the bloodstream, they can be distributed in the body. So that's why those cells have to be they bigger in size, because they do more complex functions, for example, than cuboidal cells, where just cuboidal cells absorb water and some micromolecules. All right. So the next I'm gonna explain the connective tissue. So as I said before, connective tissue is connect different parts of a body or support some body parts and keep everything in place and together. In this case, muscles, bones are connected by ligaments, right, and stay together intact. So we also have different types of connective tissue. We have some specialized connective tissue, which is blood, cartilage, bones, and adipose connective tissue. And we have loose fibrous connective tissue and dense fibrous connective tissue. So the biggest difference between connective tissue and epithelial tissue, how much cells you have in and how much they distribute. So cells in a connective tissue, cells do not attach physically to the basal membrane. So connective tissue do not have a basal membrane. They do not have, or they do not interact to each other, except adipose tissue. In adipose tissue, cells do interact with each other, but they still don't have a basal membrane. There's a difference between connective tissue and epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue do not have extracellular matrix. So extracellular matrix is a matrix which is surround cells around, and as you can remember, in epithelial cells, they only interact with the neighbor cells. So you don't have much space between cells, right? So you don't have any space. But in a connective tissue, so this is a nuclei, this is a fibroblast. A single unit in a fibrous connective tissue is a fibroblast, which is they produce a lot of collagen, proteoglycans, glycoproteins, elastin, and so on, different types of fibers, and they do not physically interact, right? They do not interact, but they have they make extracellular matrix. In a loose fibrous connective tissue, those matrix is loose, right? So it's not dense. But in a dense fibrous connective tissue, you can see how the different layers of fibers connect to each other. They densely packed. We're gonna talk later about adipose tissue. The other specialized connective tissue is our bones and a different cartilage. So let me just introduce and explain basic anatomy of a bone. A single unit of a bone is an osteon, and this is a structure. Each osteon has a central canal, which is half artery, vein, and nerves. So, and those canicules, canals, small canals, which is through those canals, nutrition, gases, and water is diffused to those cells. So this is a single cells, osteocytes. Those are osteocytes, a single cells of a bone, and they located in a special place called they call I forgot how they call. All right. Anyway, so so you can see how those cells have a distance between themselves, so they do not physically interact. So this is a big. So this is a description of connective tissue. They have extracellular space, and the cells doesn't physically interact. The same with a hyaline cartilage, or any type of cartilage. The cells doesn't physically interact, and they have dense matrix, which is made of a collagen. The other one specialized type of a connective tissue is our blood. We have different types of cells in blood. It includes red blood cells, which is responsible for trafficking oxygen and carbon dioxide. We have white blood cells, which is specialized in your immunity and responsible for your immune response. If you have some kind of infection, those white blood cells is going to be able to defeat those infections. And platelets, which is responsible to if you have a cut, those platelets is going to be able to block this loss of blood from the bloodstream. As the same, please go to this table and try to see the difference between different see the difference between different type of a connective tissue, where they're located and their function. For example, adipose tissue, which is a fat. We have insulation, fat storage, and protection. Also, as a fat storage, it means energy storage, right? If you because fat can use to burn and make energy. So let's see at the real examples. So the first connective tissue, so this is a connective tissue, different types. We're not gonna talk about the embryonic connective tissue. This is not the purpose of our class. Loose connective tissue, dense, loose connective tissue, and we have dense connective tissue. What's the difference between loose and dense? The difference how those extracellular matrix is composed. In a loose connective tissue, you have a lot of space between those fibers. So this connective tissue is very soft, and most of the time you can find this connective tissue under your skin to support the skin and protect your organs and blood vessels. So you have a lot of blood vessels in the connective tissue, nerves, and those nerves and blood vessels are supported and protected by connective tissue. Dense connective tissue you can find in ligaments, also you can find in tendons. They much tougher, and they're responsible to connect very active portion of a body, especially our muscles and bones. So those fibers have a directions, and they doesn't have so much space between them. So the collagen fibers are tightly packed on those tissue, and the cells which is made collagen and different types of fibers are called fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are responsible single unit cells in those tissues. In a dense irregular connective tissue, the difference between irregular connective tissue is the way how the fibers are located. You don't see any special direction of fibers. That's why it calls irregular. You also can find those in some types of tendons. Then we have adipose tissue. Adipose tissue also locate and it's have a lot of function. Have many function. One of the biggest function is to storage triglyceride or fat to as a storage of energy for future use. It also has some. It also can storage some fat soluble vitamins or hydrophobic vitamins. Hydrophobic, it means it doesn't like water. It also protects our body and our organs, and also act as a support in isolation. We have actually two types of adipose tissue. This is brown fat and white fat, and we're going to talk the difference. Then we have different types of cartilage, bone, and blood. So loose connective tissue. So this is how the loose connective tissue looks like. As you can see, you have a single cells, fibroblast. They produce collagen, they produce elastin, and as you can see, those fibers have a lot of space between them, so they're not tightly packed to each other. So this is and you don't have a real direction, right? So that's the biggest difference between loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. Dense connective tissue the difference is you have tightly packed fibers and they have a direction. And those fibers are made of a collagen and elastin. Some you have a little bit of glycoproteins. And you have to be able to the purpose of this class is to be able to for you is to distinguish between for example, loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue, or difference between adipose tissue and cartilage, or difference between cartilage and loose connective tissue. Right, so you have to be able to go to this site and try to see the difference between those different types of a tissue. And I want to mention one more time, as you can see, those cells doesn't interact. Sometimes they do, but they still, cells do not packed tightly. You have a lot of extracellular matrix around, but you have fewer cells. In an epithelial tissue, it's opposite. You have so many cells, but you don't have extracellular matrix. Example of a cartilage. So this is elastic cartilage you can find in the ear, in the outer ear, the pinna. So this is a cartilage by itself, right here. And those cells, the same as on the bones, they like those cells of a cartilage, hydroblast, and in the bones, osteoblast, they locate in a special place, and they call them lacunas. So those, they locate on the lacunas, and the difference between cartilage and bones, those lacunas do not communicate to each other by they cannot communicate by canals. If you're gonna compare the structure of a bones and structure of a cartilage, you can see the cartilage do not. So those cells, the only way they can communicate is by diffusion through the dense collagen. In the bones, the cells are connected to each other, and they connected to the central canal, which has vein, and it has a vein and artery and nerves, and that how the different supplies, how because of this canal, cell can get different supplies of the oxygen, water, and nutritions. But chondrocytes, the unit, chondrocytes, the cell unit in a cartilage, getting their nutritions and oxygen by the simple diffusion. For that reason, and for somebody can misunderstand those red stain fibers as a capillaries, but it's not. This is actually type of a collagen, type of a elastin, different types of elastin. And if you damage a cartilage, it's gonna take a lot of time to heal that cartilage, for only one reason, because the cartilage does not have a blood supply. So if you're gonna damage a cartilage right there, it's gonna take, and you have a blood supplies, which is right there. You have some blood vessels right there, right? So this is a blood vessels, and all the nutrition of those cells, they have to go through that connective tissue first, loose dense connective tissue, and then it has to go to the elastic cartilage. And all the nutrition has to go through the simple diffusion or osmosis, right? So those cells do not communicate with each other, and they have a dense, uh, uh, densely packed extracellular matrix. This is an example of a portion of a bone. So this is a bone, and the top of a bone, of your bone, and a joint, especially your joints. On the top of your joints, you have a hyaline articular cartilage. This is the top layer. So the same as a elastic cartilage, this cartilage also doesn't have a blood supply. So if the damage happens, it's gonna take a long time to heal, because you have a blood vessels right here and right there. So all the oxygen and nutrients have to be diffused through the dense extracellular matrix. So you have a single cells in the lacunas, and they produce basically extracellular matrix, and then how they get far away from each other. So please be able to see the difference between cartilage and, for example, connective tissue, right, or simple epithelial. So be able to see the difference. This is simple epithelial, and for example, this is a cartilage. So be able to see this. This is cartilage, and this is epithelium, right? Be able to see this. And how you can see this? How much extracellular matrix you have. In an epithelium, in a simple epithelium, all the cells attach to each other, to the basal membrane and to each other. In a connective tissue, cells do not attach to each other. Right? They mostly time they separately, and that's a big difference. They have so much extracellular matrix. So this is all the extracellular matrix. So this representation of a bone. So right, this is osteon. This is central canal. It has simple epithelium, which is made a vein or a capillary, and this looks like a nerve. And you have osteocytes in the lacunas, and all the lacunas they interact by those canals, small caniculas, and the cells, and all of them is interact to those central canal, where they can take some oxygen, some nutrients, and absorb some nutrients from this. So if you're gonna damage your bones, they're gonna heal much faster, because they have a source of direct nutrients and oxygen. So this is example of a brown fat and white fat. So the biggest difference between those two types of fat is their function. So the function of a general fat of adipose adipocytes or adipose cells is to store the fat for future use. Store fat as an energy to produce energy if you need this in the future. And you can see, so I'm gonna zoom in. You can see nuclei. You can see nuclei of a you can see nuclei are pushed by a triglyceride to the plasma membrane. This is a plasma membrane. They doesn't have a basal membrane. It's a difference, right? Remember the difference: plasma membrane and basal membrane. So basal membrane is a connective tissue. Plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer, which is have every single cell. All right. So The biggest difference and the difference in a brown fat. So this is a brown fat. You can see the cells are much smaller. They have also nuclei which is pushed to the out to the membrane, and they have droplets. They have many droplets of fat, and they also have a lot of mitochondria. And the function of a brown fat is to produce heat in the newborns. So newborns have a lot of brown fat. Is a protection for not to get cold, because the body weight of a newborns is really small, so the body can cool down much faster than grown man. In a grown man body you need a longer time to cool down the tissue down. But in the newborns, because the amount of and weight is very small, these newborns can cool down really fast, and this might lead to death. That's why they have a high amount of brown fat, 5% of a total weight. So this is gonna protect them and insulate from the from the cold temperature. And the only purpose of this fat is to burn fat for heat, not even for energy, but for heat. So basically they use fat to heat it down. All right, I'm gonna finish right here, and next lecture is gonna be about the muscular tissue and nervous tissue.